All right, you should see at this point that div tags stack on top of each other by their very nature. That is how a div tag is structured as an HTML element. Well, now if I wanted to create two div tags that are side by side, like a left sidebar that might fill up this area on the screen, and a right sidebar or content area that will fill up this area on the screen, I can do that through the float property of CSS. And let's go ahead and take a look at this. So again, I want to create a new div tag. So I'll do Insert, Layout Objects, Div Tag. This will get very familiar to you on creating div tags. And again, I need to designate where I want it on the page. And again, I'm going to say after tag, and the tag I want to put it after is the navigation div tag. And I'll go ahead and create a CSS rule for it. I'm going to call it ID, and I'm going to go ahead and call this one left side bar. And I want it to go into my external style sheet. I'll say OK. Opens up my CSS rule definition. I'm going to go ahead and choose a background color for this. And the background that I want is a, just for the sake of demonstration, an orange color. And again, I'll go ahead and create a border with a solid 1 pixel black border. And I'll go ahead and say OK to that. I didn't set up, and let me go back into my left sidebar by first saying OK to this, because I need to set up the width and the height. And you can see that when I drop this in, just like with our navigation, it goes all the way to the end of the page, because by its nature or default, it's set to be 100% of whatever the page width, unless you designate that by setting here in the box property a width. I'll go ahead and make this one 250 pixels and a height of 500 pixels. And what I want to do with this is float it left, because by its nature it's going to stack underneath the navigation div, and I want it to be floated to the left because I'm going to float to the right another div tag for the content of the page. So I'll go ahead and say left and OK, and there it is, floated to the left, taking up 250 pixels in width, 500 in height. So now to get the content area over here, I'll come up here and say Insert, Div Tag. I'll go ahead and designate it to be after tag, and the tag I want it to be after is left sidebar. And notice that when I choose the left sidebar, if you come over here into your code, you'll see that this is the code for all the div tags. Starts with div, and then the ID, the name of it is here in the parentheses. And then this is just the content for it. And these div tags within the code of HTML are stacked one underneath each other. It's the CSS that's formatting them. So after tag, which is going to place it after this left sidebar tag, so underneath it here in the code, and in our design view, I'm going to use CSS to actually format it so that it lays out over here to the right of the left sidebar. So again, I'll click New CSS Rule, come in here to ID. I'll go ahead and call this Right Content. I want it to go into my style sheet. I'll say OK to that. Brings me into my CSS rule definitions. I'll go ahead and give it a very light yellow background just to have that. Again, I want to go ahead and add a border to it. I want it to have a 1 pixel and a color of black. Say OK to that. And again, I forgot to set up my rules. So I'll go back into it. Oop, can't do that. I'll say OK. And actually come back into it through the CSS Styles panel because I need to set up the width and the height. So I'll come over here into my box now and choose a value of 710 because I made this sidebar, left sidebar, 250 pixels. I know that these are 960 pixels, so 960 minus 250 is 710 pixels, and that should cause this right content div tag to fit in this area right after, in a placement right here after the left sidebar. I'll go ahead and set the height here to be 500. And then for my float, I want it to float to the right of the left sidebar, so I'll go ahead and choose right. And again, I'm not going to set up the padding in the margins yet, but I'll say OK. And notice that, yeah, it places the right content to the right. But it's got a little gap here, and that's because one is floating left, which is this direction to the left, and the other is floating right. So it will go all the way out to the edge of the page. And right now this page is fluid. There's no set page width. We're going to wrap a div tag around all of this to set it to a dimension of 960 pixels. But for right now, we'll go ahead and let that float. And we're going to create one more div tag at the bottom that is a footer. So again, I'll come up here to my insert, choose layout objects, div tag. I want it to go after the tag, and the tag I want it to go after. Again, this is in the order of how it's written in the HTML code. I want it to go after my right content, so I'll choose right content. Click my new CSS rule definition, make it an ID. I'll go ahead and call this my footer area. Again, I want it to go into my external style sheet. I'll say OK to that. Set up a background color, and I'll go ahead and make this one a real light blue. I'll create again a border so things are consistent of solid, 1 pixel, and black. And then in the box category, I want to make this 960 pixels. I want it to have maybe we'll make it a good size border of about 60 pixels. And then one of the things you'll find, and I'll go ahead and do this without changing it, if I say OK to it at this time and I don't clear my floats, watch what happens. And you might see this when you work on assignment 3. I come back here to my insert div box. I'll double check everything. Looks good. Say OK. And notice right here in the code, I have my footer area. And it's in the right order of the div tags I've added. And yet here it appears behind these two floated. And that's due to the fact that this one is floated left, this one is floated right. For div tags to continue stacking underneath each other, you have to turn your floats off. And to do that, I need to go into my footer CSS style rule again and clear the floats. So I'll go ahead and double click the footer area style rule, come back into my box setting, and notice that I have float, and I can choose left, right, or none. Well, this is not what you want to choose to clear a float. If you choose none for the float, basically that's the default setting. And it's how you can clear an already set float from a div element, such as the left sidebar. If I wanted to clear that, I would, since I already set it to left, I would need to come back in and set it to none. To clear floats that were set prior to a new div tag, you have to use the clear field. And I'll come up here and choose. Notice I have a choice of left, right, or both. I'm going to choose both because I set a left float and a right float. And then I'll say OK to this and watch what happens. My footer area now behaves correctly and moves to the bottom of the page. And that is how you can float div tags next to each other. And then if you want the div tags to keep stacking, you have to clear the float, such as the footer area here. Watch the next video to learn how to wrap all of these and constrain them into a fixed width web page